Wilhelm Wundt was born in 1832 in Neckarau, Germany, and is often credited as the father of modern experimental psychology. Before him, the study of the mind belonged to philosophy and speculative thought. But Wundt changed everything. Trained in medicine and physiology, he merged empirical science with introspective inquiry. In 1879, at the University of Leipzig, he founded the world's first psychology laboratory. This wasn't just a symbolic act. It marked the beginning of psychology as a science, with its own methods, subjects, and experiments. Wundt didn't just ask what the mind was, he asked how it could be measured, studied, and understood under controlled conditions. He trained a generation of thinkers who would go on to influence psychology around the globe. Though less known today than Freud or Jung, Wundt laid the groundwork that made their work possible. He turned the mind from a mystery into a science. Before Wundt, mental processes were the domain of philosophers and theologians. Concepts like thought, emotion, and will were debated but rarely tested. Wundt introduced a radical idea. If the body could be studied through biology, why not the mind through observation and measurement? He treated mental phenomena as lawful and consistent, something that could be studied like chemistry or physics. This led to his development of experimental introspection, where trained participants would observe their own thoughts and sensations under tightly controlled conditions. Wundt's goal wasn't to understand the unconscious or diagnose illness. He wanted to understand the basic elements of consciousness. His lab measured reaction times, sensory perception, and attention. It was meticulous, repetitive, and often boring work, but it changed everything. For the first time, the inner world was studied with the same precision as the outer world. Wundt saw consciousness not as a single, unified whole, but as a collection of distinct components, like mental atoms. Just as chemists deconstruct matter into elemental particles, he sought to dissect the mind into its simplest measurable parts. He identified three primary categories: sensations such as sights or sounds, feelings as basic emotional tones like pleasant or unpleasant, and images as mental representations not directly caused by external stimuli. By analyzing these, he believed we could understand how the mind organizes experience. Importantly, Wundt emphasized the idea of voluntarism, the notion that attention is not passive but directed by the will. We choose what we focus on. This was a key break from the idea of the mind as merely reactive. Wundt's approach was structural, mapping out the architecture of mental life. He wasn't focused on why we feel, but rather on the step-by-step process of how we feel, think, and perceive. Wundt's most debated method was introspection, but it was nothing like the casual self-reflection we associate with the term today. His approach was rigorous, highly structured, and carefully trained. Participants, often psychology students, were taught to observe and describe their own immediate mental experiences in response to specific stimuli, all under tightly controlled conditions. For example, they might be exposed to a light flash, a ticking metronome, or a puff of air, and then asked to report only what they directly experienced: the exact intensity of the sound, the duration of a color, or whether the sensation felt pleasant or unpleasant. They were strictly forbidden from interpreting these experiences or relating them to memories or emotions. For instance, they could not say, "It reminded me of fire," but only "It was bright, red, and lasted half a second." The goal was to break down conscious experience into its smallest components, like examining the ingredients of a recipe rather than the finished dish. This method required tremendous mental focus and consistency, and required highly trained observers. While later critics saw it as too subjective, Wundt believed it was the first serious attempt to study the inner world with scientific precision. At the core of Wundt's psychology was the idea of voluntarism, the belief that the mind isn't just a passive receiver of sensory input, but an active force that shapes experience through will and focused attention. This marked a major shift from earlier theories, which viewed people as simply reacting to external stimuli. Wundt proposed that we don't just experience the world, we choose where to focus, what to attend to, and how to interpret it. He described consciousness like a spotlight, something we can direct intentionally. This meant that subjective experience wasn't random or vague, it was purposeful and structured. His theory anticipated what is now known as executive function, the brain's ability to regulate thoughts, emotions, and actions. Voluntarism opened the door to studying mental processes like attention, decision-making, and problem-solving, long before these became central topics in psychology. Wundt's lab in Leipzig became the epicenter of a new movement. Students from across the world came to study there, many of whom went on to establish psychology departments in their own countries. The lab itself was modest, but its impact was global. Wundt emphasized precision, repeatability, and the scientific method. He created experiments to measure how long it took people to make decisions, how quickly they could shift attention, or how sensory input affected perception. These may seem like small questions, but they added up to a bigger goal: mapping the structure of the human mind. Though Wundt's name isn't as well known today, his influence is everywhere. Every controlled psychological study, from memory experiments to cognitive behavioral therapy trials, owes something to his vision. He made psychology a legitimate science. He also laid the foundation for later schools of thought. Structuralism, functionalism, behaviorism, even modern neuroscience can trace their lineage to his lab. Wundt proved that we could use scientific tools to explore things once left to poets and philosophers. His methods have evolved, and many of his conclusions have been refined or discarded. But the core idea remains: the mind can be measured. He didn't have all the answers, but he gave us a way to start asking the right questions. Despite his achievements, Wundt faced criticism, even in his own time. Introspection was seen as unreliable, as results varied between observers, and his strict methodology left out broader questions about personality, development, and unconscious drives. Later thinkers like Freud, Jung, and Horney expanded psychology into new directions, challenging Wundt's narrow focus. But this isn't a failure, it's evolution. Wundt laid the tracks, and others built new trains. His work forced the field to grapple with its methods, its limits, and its possibilities. Even the rejection of his ideas helped shape psychology into the diverse, complex discipline it is today. What can we learn from Wilhelm Wundt today? First, he reminds us that even the most personal aspects of our lives, our thoughts, attention, or emotions, can be examined and understood with clarity. Try paying attention to your attention. Notice what pulls your focus, what fades into the background, how your mental spotlight moves throughout the day. Second, Wundt's experimental mindset encourages us to approach self-inquiry with discipline. Don't just feel, observe. Journal your reactions. Track your moods. Reflect without judgment. This isn't about turning your life into a science project, but about becoming more conscious. Finally, Wundt's legacy is a reminder that real insight comes from structured curiosity. When we slow down and observe our inner world carefully, we find patterns, levers, and possibilities for growth. If Wundt's story sparked any thoughts or reflections, let us know in the comments. Which of his principles might you try applying to your own life? And if you want to go deeper, like and subscribe for more deep dives into psychology, philosophy, and the inner world. Because here at the Thoughtful Revolution, we don't just consume ideas, we live them.